Adam, what's good, Mr. Satoshi, man? Is that the Jack shirt? Is that the
No, this is not. This is my take on the Jack shirt. You can't. This is an exclusive Adam 1 of 1 Satoshi shirt. I like that smooth jazz intro that we got now. That one's pretty smooth. It's like smooth coffee in the morning, man. It's good stuff.
Yeah, right. Sometimes I wonder. So we just got, for those that haven't listened to the show, we just got a whole new background. We got some new songs queued up for the delay in the morning, man. I gotta say, what a Bitcoin hangover from the conference. The price is just horrifically down.
Is it really? It's so fun. I actually don't get it with people who are in Bitcoin, like in depth. I follow, like, Adam Back is a guy who I follow, right? Deeply respect. But like, he talks about price every single day. And I'm like, wow, why would you do that? But he does it. I guess it's to, help pump his bags, right? It doesn't make sense to me. If you're a Bitcoin holder, why are you even watching the price? I don't know. That's just the way I feel.
Yeah. I mean, I've been looking at runes, and runes are getting absolutely obliterated. Absolutely.
Pull up some charts. Let's watch the fall of all runes. Is dog, the question with my runes is, like, is dog 80% of the market cap of all runes, or what is dog now? You're good at the percentages, man. What's it at now?
It's down a little bit. It's down to about 35%, which I think is probably the low, although it's probably healthy for the overall runes market cap, because you don't want You don't want one coin dominating over 50% of the entire market, or it's just it's never going to get.
I mean, when it's that, it's like you don't have a market, right? It's just basically people are paying attention to that one coin, and I see Leo still posting, like bull posting about it. So it's obviously the one people are going to know. So it feels like that's going to be the winner of Runes, but again, is Runes going to be the winner? Right? I definitely see more Runes than BRC20s. I'll say that with 100% certainty because I see 0 BRC20s on my timeline.
Well, the volume metrics are actually quite drastic. If you look at the on-chain volumes, the Runes on-chain volume is at least generally 2 or 3x more than BRC20. I mean, I saw Ordi yesterday had $4,000 in on-chain volume. So all of Sats and Ordi volume is coming from the exchanges. And
wow.
This leads to an important conversation we're going to have today with Matt, the CEO from Arc Network, is this idea of programmable runes and extending the protocol. When you look at BRC20 and runes, there's two kind of different parallels going on, and we've talked about this extensively. With BRC20, you have Unisat who came in and is basically just building the entire vertical stack in a centralized way, right? They basically are the one putting the proposals in. They're the one that's creating Fractal Bitcoin, which is their kind of programmable layer. They're building the BRC20 swap, right? They basically own the entire tech stack. Right. Whereas Casey, with Runes, he made the code, quote unquote, lightweight, 200 lines of code. He said that he had done this because he didn't want to introduce MEV on the protocol level, although you still have mempool sniping, but he didn't want to introduce new kind of MEV in the protocol. And so because of this, now you have the application layer has been given out to the community or to builders to come out and build out, right? Who's going to build the swap tool? Who's going to build the bridge? Who's going to build, right, the lending platform? Who's going to do all these things? But as we know, decentralized kind of communities and protocols take much longer to build out. And this is where Arc Network is coming in, as well as a handful of other programmable protocols or layers to come in and basically try to win it, right? It's literally open. And for those people who come in and stay here for, the next 6 months, there's going to be a handful of winners. And obviously if it's on Bitcoin, if you're going to win on Bitcoin, it's going to be quite astronomical.
No better place to win, right? I mean, that's it, man. That's the idea anyway, right? It's like you just hope, obviously these guys and others, you hope you're betting on, the right one, the right horse, right? You're hoping that Runes is the horse that wins. And it certainly feels like it will be, but nothing's guaranteed in crypto, man, right? If somebody comes up with a great BRC20 product that excites, buyers, traders, collectors, whatever, tides can turn quick in this business. That's for darn sure.
Yeah. And right before we go into the conversation, we've had a ton of these conversations with builders over the last, I guess, year. We've done the show almost a year and a half already, which is kind of crazy. We have the counterparty team on every quarter. We've had the stamps people on. We've had the track and tap ecosystem on quite extensively. We've had a handful of the Bitcoin L2 people come on as well, right? So we're familiar with all of them. But Arc Network's introducing something interesting, and I was fortunate enough to talk with Matt, who's the CEO, who I believe is behind the account, but I'll find out here in a second, about Arc Network. It's something interesting. They're calling it an execution environment. So it's something that's a little bit different from the Bitcoin L2s. They're not calling it an L2, but also I know they have a partnership with Liquidium, who's moved over there from using DLCs, discrete log contracts, which we've talked about, to using the Arc Network. So who do we have behind the account today? Arc Network account. Is anyone there?
GM, this is Brian. Sorry, Matt's wrapping up all, CEOs busy all the time. Be with us here shortly in a couple minutes. He'll be coming behind his main account. But you're right about Liquidium. They were, using DLCs and finding the limitations of that to expand their product base. So we've been working with them to, on smart contracts and trying to bring some more programmability into, what they're trying to do from a lending and borrowing standpoint.
Yeah. So Brian, could you give us, just a background of what Arc Network it is and what makes it different from, you know, these L2s or some of these other programmable layers that are beginning to pop up?
Yeah, I'll give you just a little brief intro, and then I'll let Matt expand on that a little bit later. Basically, Arch is kind of built on the premise of not wanting to bridge or add any type of like trust assumptions on the, you know, the user side and Bitcoin users. Not wanting to lock away their liquidity and their Bitcoin into, you know, the unknown. So Arch uses a different framework, combining the, you know, the ZKVM and verifier network to build smart contracts and add in that programmability layer, but still functioning on layer one Bitcoin and, you know, settling there for native Bitcoin usage and development.
Can you give me like the smooth brain? You know, I'm a smooth brain. A lot of our listeners are smooth brain. Give us the idea of how the heck does that actually work? Is it done through like an indexer, or how that works just from like the, you know, the highest level of like a technical perspective? Like, because to me it's like, well, how can my Bitcoin not be locked in a multi-sig or something and then still work in a smart contract? Like, how does that actually occur?
So as far as like the multi-sig structure, that's a little bit beyond my technical understanding. Actually, I thought I was giving you that answer already. But as far as like, you know, what you're doing from the user side, a lot of the time, the first thing that you have to do to interact with these new ecosystems that are building on Bitcoin and, you know, other chains is to bridge, right, to
Right.
lock into a smart contract. Um, Whereas on Arch, you know, your transactions are going to settle natively on Bitcoin layer one. There are some different things going on with, you know, like you mentioned, multi-sig. We put out some literature already. There's a couple Medium articles where people can go read like the deep dive on Arch multi-sig structure. And obviously, when Matt gets here, he'll be able to answer some of those more like technical questions where we're getting into, you know, what you're asking, like how do we accomplish the removal of trust assumptions and you know, still have some of that architecture, obviously, like I'm mentioning.
Cool. Well, while we have Matt waiting, or while we're waiting on Matt a little bit, we do have a few guests on stage. I'd love to pass it over to CMP, where I'm looking at your pin post. It says that you have the world's first Bitcoin dApp launchpad for the L1 and L2. Looks like you're using Arch Network in some capacity and stacks. I'd love to hear more a little bit about that.
Yes, yes. First and foremost, thank you all for having me. Love Arch, love building on Bitcoin, and love what Emblem is doing. So, shout out to all the builders in the building, no pun intended. But yes, I am CMP, CEO of NoCo Clarity, and just wanted to share a brief statistic. Less than 1% of the world knows how to technically program. So we're hyper dependent on a new 1%. So what No Code Clarity wants to do is it wants to democratize development and make it easy for anyone to be able to build on Bitcoin and launch a dApp. Life cycle of a dApp is generally you deal with the front end, you deal with the back end, and then with the Web3 integrated piece, you're going to have to deal with a smart contract or some variation of that. I am not necessarily a Bitcoin maxi, I'm Bitcoin preferred. So I prefer Bitcoin, although I know that it's a multi chain world. So, with that thesis in mind, is there things such as Bitcoin smart contracts? With the Stacks blockchain, they have a smart contract language called Clarity, and we started in that ecosystem, but we are broadening our horizon to other Bitcoin layers. And when I connected with Matt some months ago, a brief conversation turned into like 2 hours of us talking at a brief meeting. Like, we need to do something. And here we are. So we are excited to be integrating the Arch network into NoCo Clarity, and it will be live as of Q4 around time of mainnet. So really,
It's
really excited.
it's interesting because you're building kind of on the network. What makes you, because there's so many, like, you know, and Arches, they're saying it's not an L2, right, in the traditional sense. So how do you as a builder select where you're going to build? Because I think that's an interesting question to like to figure out, because it's hard. Like, how do you know? Is it just you connect with the founder and you feel like this is actually going to really happen, and there's some push behind it, or how do you actually make that call?
That's such a good question. So, I've been a founder for better or for worse since I was 18 years old. I turned 35 this year, so I've seen the ups, the downs, the sideways, etc. And I've also had a background that gave me awareness about, if people are BSing or if people are being real. So,
Yeah.
in long story short form, real recognizes real. So I can tell based off of Matt, like we've kind of been through similar fires. And also looking underneath the hood, like the tech checks out. So I think it's not an or, it's an and. Like you have to make sure that something is actually happening, because there's this viral tweet that went around, someone saying, I've been pitched 30 Bitcoin L2s, ask me
Yeah.
anything. So all these L2s that are coming, I think this was brought up earlier, there are going to be winners, they're going to be losers, and there's going to be vaporware and money grabs. But for Arch, what I'm seeing, this is the real deal. And it is an L1 play from the standpoint of infrastructure, which is huge because people are looking for unilateral exits. They're looking for something that allows for you to do things on the L1 without sacrificing liquidity or security. Arch is that. So just as happy as we are to have Arch, Arch is happy to have us so that we can help onboard more builders into the Arch network. So we're really, really excited about it.
Yeah, I absolutely love to hear that. And for those that aren't aware, Adam and I are also talking through my own my account. We also do the live stream, so we do have people watching this live on video. Just a little housekeeping notes before I do pass it off to Matt. If you have any questions, if you're on the live stream, just go ahead and post in the chat, or if you're listening, go ahead and pop or click the purple button in the bottom right hand corner, or you could just come on stage and we can have a solid conversation. I do see a lot of friendly developers in the crowd, so I know a lot of people are generally interested about this. I know Adam and I and the Emblem team, we've had discussions about using a variety of these different networks to bring Emblem to Bitcoin. And so we have some custom solutions, but for when I hear Arch Networks providing some of those, and I've heard a bunch of good reviews. So I would love to pass it over to Matt and say hello. And if you'd like to just give us, just a brief background of you and your expertise in the crypto industry, and then we'll kind of dive in.
No, GM, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yep.
There you go. Yeah.
Perfect. So also appreciate Chris, the kind words. Like you said, spent a couple hours with him at a Stacks event in Austin a few months ago, and I was elated to find out that somebody was working on no code, because I myself, as an entrepreneur and a builder in the past, I've tapped into no code type of infrastructure before, because I think that it's, if you're a builder in the space and you're not you're not a full stack dev, even if you are a full stack dev, like I don't think it necessarily makes sense when you're building at the MVP stage to devote, 6 months and $100,000 worth of value to that MVP without even getting any feedback or invalidating or trying to invalidate your ideas. So I think that what no code ultimately represents is a way that you can throw these MVP products together, try to build a little bit of a brand and a proof of concept, so that you can ultimately either raise money from investors, build a community to do it on your own without. So I think that is instrumental in this space right now, where we're trying to see what sticks, and we're trying to get creative and innovative, and build things that will ultimately be a lasting contribution without the risk of trying to build too much too soon, or without knowing more data. So I'm very excited to work with No Code Clarity and Chris to see what type of MVP products we can build in the short term.
Awesome. Yeah, it's awesome when you have builders come into your network. And I've listened to a few of your podcasts before, or in preparation of the show. I know that you guys are still in testnet, and there's about, I think you said 20 or so teams that are currently building with Arch Network, my apologies. But could you, we did have Brian give us a brief explanation. Could you give us your explanation of what Arch Network is and how it differs from some of the other L2s or operating systems or meta protocols that exist on Bitcoin?
Yeah, of course. So I would say that the major differentiator compared to virtually all other layer 2s is in the sense that there's no need to bridge there's no bridge first, programmability second type of dynamic here. When Amin and I started this project, almost a year ago now, we saw a lot of builders in the space who are trying to figure out which L2 that they wanted to build their consumer application on. Was it going to be Bob? Was it going to be Stacks? Was it going to be Merlin? And for a lot of them, they weren't quite familiar with, the amount of friction that they would be requiring their users to basically bridge their assets to this programmable chain. And as we've seen this already play out before with Wrap BTC and TBTC, like they've struggled over the last several years trying to get a meaningful amount of liquidity to bridge over to already a developed DeFi ecosystem on Ethereum via Curve and Aave, Uniswap, etc. So if we can't attract a meaningful amount of liquidity to go to an already mature DeFi ecosystem from Bitcoin, then why are we asking them to do the exact same thing to a nascent DeFi ecosystem on a Merlin, Bobs, or Stacks, or something like that, right? So if you go on all of these L2s, you have about 150 million of addressable market. That's not even close to enough for a DeFi ecosystem, right? For stable coins, you need billions. For DEXs, you need billions. For borrowing and lending, you need billions. So it's not really a good situation to be building as a developer, on an ecosystem that doesn't have a big enough addressable market. It's kind of chicken and egg. So for us, that was kind of the starting point. How do we enable developers to tap into the native liquidity that's sitting on the layer 1 today without requiring that user to engage in further trust assumptions that we know that they don't want to do?
Interesting. Okay, so I have here pulled up on your website how you guys explain it. It says Arch combines a zero-knowledge virtual machine with a decentralized verifier network to form a trust-minimized execution platform, enabling secure and verifiable smart contracts and applications built directly on Bitcoin. So the two main components here, the zero-knowledge virtual machine and then the decentralized verifier network. Could we dive into a little bit of each of these, beginning with the zero-knowledge virtual machine? Is this something that Arch Network has created within itself? Is it a fork of some other VM and you guys have added some of your own programmability to it? Give us a little detail here and then we'll go to the other side of it.
Yes. So as you know, virtually all ZK VMs are account model based, literally every single one. So as you know, also Bitcoin is not account model based, it's UTXO based. So it wasn't really like a solution to go and fork a already built version of a ZK VM because it's already still not really compatible with Bitcoin. So we initially started with the RISC-0 library just for the proof generation, which we're creating validity proofs. That's also another important distinction from a design standpoint because, these optimistic designs requiring a challenge period is very limiting in what you ultimately can use that rollup for. When you use validity proofs and actually reach consensus via threshold and signature schemes, you're actually saying, yes, this actually did happen correctly because the majority of the signers in the network are saying that it did, as opposed to assuming that it did and waiting for people to challenge it. So this is also a much more secure and I guess less trusting, I should say, design choice when it comes to the proof generation. But effectively, what you have, as you mentioned, the two core components of the Arch network is you have the VM, which is taking the data inputs from the invocation transaction that's happening on the layer 1. So we're taking the last state, a PSBT that's generated, another smart contract call information. We run that through the VM, which then spits out the outputs. Now, of course, ZK is not possible to do directly on Bitcoin. So this is like an off-chain computation, essentially. Where it gets brought back on chain is the verifier network are just validating these proofs that are generated by the VM, signing with their keys, saying that this did actually happen. These state changes and asset transfers are indeed valid. And then the leader node is able to sign the unsigned transaction that's generated by the VM. And then that posts back to Bitcoin. This is also very different compared to other layer 2s because we're not rolling up this data. We're not compressing it. We're literally settling that transaction every single time on Bitcoin, where that state change and asset transfer will eventually live.
Adam, do you understand that?
What we have here is a failure to communicate. No, it's just, this is such dev talk, man. It's like, I mean, I kind of get it, but maybe you want to break it down for the smooth brains in the audience, just like a real simple Like I just kind of
Sure.
breaking it down in that, okay, does this mean I'm going to be using or interfacing on a website and all this kind of happens in the background? But like the network you're talking about, how is it that I, as a user, when you say a network or something, that sounds like a centralized entity that I'm somehow trusting, right? And so if you want to just kind of give it to us, like how am I trusting that, even though the transaction settles on Bitcoin, right? How am I trusting that external network that I'm sure, you guys are operating?
We're not actually operating this network. So it's actually fully decentralized in the sense that we have decentralized signers, and we'll eventually actually decentralize the prover network as well. So in the same exact way that we trust Ethereum nodes and Solana nodes to verify that these transactions ultimately happen for the EVM and SVM respectively, like that's what you're basically trusting, that the operators of these verifier nodes are behaving in a non-malicious way or not colluding. And by the way, the people that you're trusting in this network are the likes of Kiln, Luga Nodes, Blockdaemon, Juicy Stake, Edgevana, like all the most well-known commercial validators in the space on both chain agnostic side and the Solana specific side. Like those are the signers in our network. So
those network signers, like on Ethereum and stuff, right? They have a staking mechanism where they're punished, right, if they were to act maliciously. So how are you guys operating? Are you operating under a similar kind of model where you'll have tokens, they'll have to stake, or how's that going to work?
Exactly. So it's a delegated proof of stake model that operates directly on top of the proof of work of Bitcoin. So these nodes are putting up stake that have slashing risk. When they collude or act maliciously in the network, they lose their economic security, and that's how you as a user trust that everything is secure and decentralized, because there's economic security, a sufficient amount, as well as just these very trusted actors in the space. Of course, as we scale the verifier network, those familiar faces will become more diluted, but the economic security is what will take over at that point.
Very interesting. And I guess for another kind of simple model to walk through, most people in Bitcoin are very familiar, or in the ordinal space are very familiar with Liquidium. And I mentioned this in the earlier before you showed up, that they were previously using DLC Link and DLCs to do DLCs and PSBTs in order to basically initiate on-chain loans. I know at some point, I don't know if it was earlier this year or late last year, they moved over to the Arch network. So can we talk through, excuse me, can we talk through maybe the issues that they were running into and what solutions Arch Network provided for them to make that migration over?
Yeah, so what DLCs ultimately are like a pseudo programmable smart contract for Bitcoin, where if anybody's used like that app called If Then That, where you kind of set up these little macro programmable functions where that if something happens, then the next thing happens automatically. And that's effectively what a DLC is. And the way that the DLC is able to know what's happening is they use a centralized oracle to feed the data of what's happening back to that dependent, contract. So in the context of Liquidium, it's a peer-to-peer, borrow and lending against ordinals. For a DLC to be created, you ultimately need to know who the borrower, who the lender is, how much the loan is for, what the interest rate is, and what the ordinal is, all up front. And if we're looking at the type of DeFi that happens on Ethereum, that's a completely limiting type of scope compared to what we see on Ethereum or Solana, right? You have liquidity pools, you have multi-party contracts, you have composable contracts, et cetera. So you can build these money Legos. So ultimately what Liquidium and virtually all DeFi applications building on Arch will be able to do is they'll be able to build these money Legos and build these more composable DeFi smart contracts so that we can create more vast pools of liquidity that can ultimately be tapped into. Because on a peer-to-peer model, you're very limited in just like when a borrower and a lender can strike a deal. But if you have these deep sources of liquidity in a pool, that's instant liquidity for loans, that's instant liquidity for buy now, pay later, and all these other types of protocols that apps like Liquidium can use to grow their TVL and grow their volume.
Interesting. And as I earlier we had this conversation a few weeks ago. You sent me the Arch white paper, and as I was looking through it, there was something very interesting or unique that I'd found here, and it discusses understanding UTXOs and state UTXOs and asset UTXOs, and then it has a simple just infographic above it of kind of how Arch is set up and how it plays in the middle of Bitcoin and the ZK VMs. Could you describe to us how Arch uses state UTXOs and asset UTXOs and really what the difference is here?
Yeah, so like an asset UTXO is no different than what we already understand it to be, like an ordinal, for example. That's an example of an asset UTXO. So within the Arch network, you know, various meta protocols are able to do state changes, but not necessarily asset transfers. So asset transferring is a very big piece to this design. And the third key component to that architecture is, you know, you mentioned the ZK VM and the verifier network are the two main components. The third, I would say, is the multi-sig, right? Like, and multi-sigs get a bad rap because, you know, that can mean a variety of different things depending on the design choices that have been made with regards to that multi-sig. It could just be three guys in an office sharing keys, or it can be something like a scripted multi-sig, scriptless, musig. And then in terms of Arch, we have the first ever implementation of Frost plus Roast, which is a new and you know, very performant type of multi-sig with some added robustness from the Roast implementation. So in terms of threshold signature scheme and design, like it's a very secure design in a nutshell is what I'm saying. But so with regards to, I'm sorry, where was I going with that?
Actually, one question in there is what's the multi-sig needed for? I guess is that for the liquidity pools? You need the multi-sig. Is that how that works?
Yeah, so like in Ethereum and Solana, you have these smart contract controlled wallets, you have program derived addresses on Solana. Like in the context of programmability, multi-sigs and wallets don't add programmability, but they're a necessary component to be the executing body or something of those assets. Like someone needs to hold the funds in the multi-sig, right? It can't just sit in the user's wallet and trust that they're not going to double spend, right? They actually have to reside somewhere, but it still has to be safe and programmable and needs to be secured by a verifier network. So there's, you know, it's easy to just lock in on the word multi-sig and be like, ooh, centralized, you know, but at the end of the day, like it really depends how that multi-sig is programmed and governed by the verifier network. So that's the third main piece there.
Yeah, it makes sense. I could give a little example here to just give you a little bit of a breather. Last year, myself and Bunzi and a handful of people kind of co-founded OmniSat, which was really a AMM for BRC20 at the time, because we created it, you know, 6 weeks after BRC20 was first created. And one of the issues that we were running into was how to decentralize the LP pools or the keys to the LP pool. And this is still an issue that a handful of AMMs are running into. And I don't think there has been a proven winner yet, although I think DotSwap has kind of their own solution to this. The idea is like, if you're going to have an AMM on Bitcoin, right, you know, the majority of people here have a high degree of preference for decentralization and self-sovereignty. And the current model, because there's no, right, there at the time, right, there was an on-chain execution of being able to decentralize the keys to the LP pools. So essentially you just have the funds to these LP pools in a multi-sig. And of course, everyone, as Matt is saying, has this fear, right, that just because it's a multi-sig, people are just going to scam you and run off with the money. I mean, that was the same criticism that Merlin faced as well in the beginning. But of course, you have different types of credibility backing. But for us, we were looking for a long time, trying to figure out, okay, do you use like a nodes as a service to distribute the keys, kind of something similar that Emblem does? But then at this point, if you take the keys off chain, will the Bitcoiners then prefer, right, the keys to be on a different blockchain rather than to be on Bitcoin, right? Because then it's off chain, but it's still on chain. It's off of Bitcoin, but it's on Ethereum in this case. So you have all these different trade-offs in terms of how to secure and decentralize these keys to the LP pools, right, or to the swap or any type of, you know, wallet that holds the monetary flow of whatever the kind of protocol is. And so I think that listening to Matt describe this is exactly this conversation that we were having over the past year, and to see Arch Network attempting to solve this is it's really incredible, because you take the same issue that we had, but you're attempting to keep it on Bitcoin. There's an off-chain component, but it's a little bit more, I guess you'd say, Bitcoin native than some of the other solutions out there.
Yeah, as far as the multi-sig and the verifier network is concerned, that's 100% Bitcoin native. Like the nodes are signing with their Bitcoin keys to validate those transactions. The only thing that's happening that is off-chain is the computation that's happening inside the VM, because Bitcoin is not capable of being able to do these computations without a soft fork. And maybe there will be a soft fork that enables things like Opcat or more expressive IDC in the future, but this is all. This is the best design that we could come up with, where we can do the Turing complete smart contracts without the need to bridge. That's our North Star, and that's what we're laser focused on. We do have future roadmap items that certainly focus on scalability and performance, but in our opinion, it doesn't really make sense to focus on scalability and performance until first you've unlocked programmability, right? Like on Ethereum, you can have 900 different L2s, but it makes sense for scalability because you already have the EVM. There is no native VM for Bitcoin. So until you have that, it doesn't necessarily make sense to focus on scalability or performance yet. You need to build sufficient faith and trust in some verifier network and some VM that is doing these computations and state transitions and asset transfers, so that then when you start to offer the state-only execution, which is kind of like what an L2 is, that now is much more accepted because people have been using this same VM and verifier network within the context of DeFi for a certain period of time. There's a certain amount of economic security in the network. So now I'm willing to trust the state-only execution. But until that happens, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I would say over the past few months, we're starting to see a handful of teams now attempting to solve this. We had the Relics protocol on. I've seen that recently. I think it's called Ordinal OS. The guy from Sovereign has created a way to verify ZK proofs on chain in some capacity, and we've also seen OPCat and some people from, I think, Starknet say that they've also been or have a way to attempt to solve this or verify it through OPCat. But one of my appreciations for the Bitcoin and ordinal space, and why I find it so interesting, is, as you mentioned, Matt, right? Ethereum has the EVM, Solana has the SVM, but there is no VM on Bitcoin. So everyone's really attempting to solve this in their own way. So it creates a high degree of originality and customization, which really leads to some interesting outcomes. And I like to call them kind of like tribal networks, or the village theory, where because Bitcoin has such a high state of liquidity, dense liquidity, 1.3 trillion, which is 3 times higher than Ethereum, there's so much volume that can exist, or liquidity that can go around, that you can have somewhat of multiple of these solutions exist and kind of grow and coincide together. Kind of like you're seeing right now with Runes and BRC20, but this takes it and extends the programmability a bit further. So, really, really props to you for attempting to solve this. But then this leads to the next question is, how did you guys put your heads together and figure this out? Like, because I've not had a conversation with somebody that's gone about it this way. Like, give us a little bit of the details on the, the composition of the team, and maybe some of the past knowledge or expertise that led you to implementing this solution.
Yeah, I mean, I have to give all the credit in the world to Amin, my co-founder. Even despite my best efforts, I tried selling him on such smaller ideas when we were kind of going through the process of invalidating the ideas and trying to poke holes in, our strategy. But this has been his vision from day one. Like, in terms of the design choices, everything, the implementation. I think that there's only a couple hundred people in the world that really truly understand Frost at this level, much less even from that even knew that there was a library available for Roast. Like, Amin is someone that absolutely takes his craft seriously. He studies bit proposals like in his bed, like always looking at past implementations that maybe was a little before its time, thinking about how it can be utilized now in the current state of things. So I think that like, Amin is just super cracked. And when we went to go scale the engineering team, he hired just a bunch of other crack devs just like him. Because when like Chris said, real recognize real in the beginning of this call, when at least when I got on, like these devs, they see Amin, they see the questions that he asked to make sure that everyone understands it to a level that he understands it. And it's this real recognize real. We've basically been able to build a team of super based and crack devs that are allowing us to build this really transformative technology.
That's
How
awesome.
are you guys? Oh, sorry, Jake.
I got one more technical question, and then we can kind of move on. Can you just describe what frost and roast is? I'm unfamiliar with both those terms. I think most people are too.
This is starting to get on the edge of my technical understanding. So roast stands for, let's see here, what's roast stands for? Robust async, like these are basically like thresholded signature scheme type of implementations. So let me see what roast.
No worries. Yeah. Here, I'll let you look it up for a second.
Matt,
go ahead.
Robust asynchronous schnorr threshold signatures. That's what roast
Oh, the
stands for.
schnorrs. I love schnorrs, man. Nothing like a good schnorr when I'm developing, man.
Exactly.
Bro, it's so technical. Like you get into the total weeds of what this stuff is. Crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of like the response that I get from some people. Like people that have been building in TSS for a long time. They're like, shit, I didn't even know that the library for roast was even out yet. And we already have an open source implementation of Frost plus roast. So like that just goes to Amin's credit. I'm just the mouthpiece here talking about his vision most of the time, but he's insanely smart and he takes his craft super serious. So I have all the faith in the world that him and his team are going to deliver.
Awesome. So frost and roast, they're signature schemes, and from my understanding, this is the first time I've come across it. And I've personally had at least 5 to 10 conversations with different TEs, TSSs, AVSs, all these different signature schemes. And at the end of the day, this is, I think, what it really comes down to is what type of implementation of a signature scheme do you use in order to move assets across chains? This is probably where I'm assuming the trustless bridging comes in play.
Yeah, absolutely does. Like if you're trying to do a bridge, you're trying to do some type of smart vault or escrow wallet or something like that. Like I believe that we have the most secure multi-sig architecture and implementation that's out there today. That's been validated by a few Bitcoin researchers that are highly respected. I don't want to put them on blast here if they're not comfortable making that claim yet, but certainly have worked pretty hand in hand with some of the more active researchers in the Bitcoin space who are kind of deferred to as the L2 police almost, that are analyzing the buzzwords that they're claiming on their websites, looking at their docs and saying, whoa, wait a minute, which I think is badly needed in this space right now, because when everything is so nascent and you have these 80 plus L2s with various designs are able to claim certain, buzzwords, retail is kind of left unsuspecting, and they don't really understand all of these different design choices. So it really requires, these good actors in the space that are putting everything under a microscope and holding people accountable to what they're claiming.
Yeah, I would say retail actually typically, Bitcoin's a little bit different, but retail typically doesn't even care. They just want something an app that they like using or want to use or compelled to use, right? And that's kind of leans into my question. Like you could build literally the greatest L2 on earth, but if users aren't interested, right, nobody's going to care. Like what's your strat for, bringing in, builders to try and create compelling, apps and products on your network?
Yeah, sorry, man. I had to mute you there I had to mute him for a second. You should be able to come off now. There's a lot of background noise. If he is there.
You're still muted, Matt, if you're talking.
So Pensive Shepe on the live stream says the pattern was set by the early web days and JavaScript. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so I would say like initially the biggest advantage that we have is we're one of the few protocols or execution environments that lets developers tap into the native liquidity that's on Bitcoin today, right? So like we don't even need to really pitch that dynamic very much. They're reaching out to us because it's the deciding is, do I want to go build on Stacks or Merlin or Bob where there's 150 to 200 million of addressable market, or do I want to build on Arch where there's 1.3 trillion in addressable market? And I'm saying that with obvious some air quotes or whatever, because there's some cold storage out there and centralized exchanges that certainly can't participate. But at the end of the day, that's a considerable, much more amount of liquidity and addressable market to tap into. So when it comes to getting a community to really recognize our design, it's not really up to us to market to the community. It's up to the developers who are building on us to market to the community. And of course, we're going to be, supporting those products and builders as much as we can. But in terms of how are we planning on attracting, builders to come build? They're already coming. We've got over 250 signups for our testnet. Like you mentioned before, Jake, we have about 30 different projects who are building in our private beta for the last 3 months. So I think that's the proof in the pudding that they see the advantage of the addressable market and the vast liquidity that they can tap into.
Interesting. Yeah. And so here, let's talk about some of these projects. I'm curious, so we could dive a little bit out of the the technical details and more in the kind of the application layer. In your white paper, decentralized finance, ordinal marketplaces, DAOs, trust minimized bridges, and Oracle services. Using Arch Network, is there a way to circumvent the mempool sniping that's currently ongoing? I know OPCat or Udi claims that OPCat can solve this, to be determined. But is there a way for Arch to assist or alleviate this current issue?
Yeah, so within our VM, we can turn RBF off so that mempool sniping isn't even possible within the execution of Arch's VM. Once it's settled on Bitcoin, there's no way that somebody can reverse engineer the inputs and the outputs so that they can hack that transaction or try to front run that transaction. So once it gets submitted to the mempool, by that time it's already too late. We're using the transaction ordering from Bitcoin, inheriting that and bringing it within the VM, and the VM prioritizes the ones that come in first. So there is no opportunity to mempool snipe, like a Arch smart contract.
It's great for my rune bags, hopefully, and the ordinal bags. It's the highest contention. So give us a little bit of a preview then of what type of projects you're seeing that have been in the beta stage, that have been building. Is there anything new and novel that's going to be introduced to the ecosystem?
I find it hard to find anything net new in crypto. Everything that was worth trying has literally been tried, and everything that wasn't even worth trying was still tried. Ponzi contracts and musical chairs, safe moon, Russian roulette, degen games on base. Literally everything's been tried. So I don't know how many net new things for crypto as a whole, but I do certainly think that you're going to see a tremendous amount of net new things for Bitcoin. Lots of new degen DeFi contracts. We have a prediction market that's being built on us right now. We're working with Magic Eden on a few different features that will allow for things like leverage and and decentralized runes trading, stuff like that. So I think the DEX infrastructure is really where the Arch infrastructure shines a lot, because there's virtually no other infrastructures that can allow for totally trustless swaps from the taker side, which is very unique. The way that that ultimately works is, of course, the makers of the liquidity who put funds into the liquidity pool of the multi-sig, they're trusting the verifier network. But the users who are swapping against that liquidity using PSPTs, they make zero trust assumptions. So there's at least 7 different DEXs who are all building with us right now for that reason alone. Everywhere else, you have to either bridge to get to that DEX, whether you're the taker or the maker. So I think that's fairly unique as well, and something that should certainly help Rune's liquidity in the short term, right? Which is where, things are kind of challenging for Runes right now. There's no DEX liquidity, there's no SEX liquidity. So there's just not really much to do besides trading on Magic Eden and Unisat.
Yeah, and then when people brick the floor, it becomes one of the most painful experiences of all time. Regarding OPCat, is there a way for Arch to leverage OPCat, or would you say this is an alternative to it?
Well, certainly in the short term, it's an alternative, because obviously OPCat's not ready yet, or it's not voted into being a soft fork. So I would say that once OPCAT does get approved or voted in and forked in, there'll be ways that we can offload some of our consensus to OPCAT. What I think that a lot of people don't really quite understand is that OPCAT isn't like a magic bullet for smart contracts on Bitcoin. So it's not like OPCAT gets enabled and then you're going to see Ethereum on Bitcoin on day one. You know, there's a lot of things and use cases that OPCAT will never be able to enable. But what it will allow for, some things that make it very interesting, is obviously the trustless bridging, and certain areas of like, you know, being able to utilize this trustless consensus mechanism that doesn't necessarily need a verifier network anymore.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. Adam, you have any questions, any thoughts?
I guess, well, one question when we were talking about the network and the validators, and they'll be rewarded. So are you guys going to do tokens, or how's that going to break down?
Yeah, we will have our own Arch token that will basically be the native gas token of the network. It's similar monetization model as Ethereum and Solana, where the gas fees and the MEV ultimately get shared with the verifier network. So we'll be upcharging the network resources that they're ultimately paying for, charging the gas similar way of Ethereum, and then we'll share that revenue with the verifier network, in addition to whatever emissions that will also kind of supplement that within our tokenomics for the next like 2 years or something like that.
Awesome. So looking at your website, I'm curious about the funding and the backing. Right here on your website, you have a handful of very credible capital firms and venture, I guess capital funds and venture studios, including, Multicoin, UTXO Management, ABCDE, Newman. I see Portal Ventures, CMS, and Tangent. What were the conversations like with these capital funds who have also been putting hundreds of millions of dollars into L2s, and then you guys come along with a execution environment and kind of approach it in a different type of way? Were these type of capital funds interested? Did they understand really what was going on, and kind of et cetera?
Yeah, I think that with any like new type of technology or infrastructure, sometimes there's this element of like, what are you guys? Like, what are you identifying yourselves as? And for a lot of the VCs that we, frankly, we had like 70 plus meetings with VCs in February and March, and we had that conversation quite a bit. Like, are you guys an L2? No, we're not an L2. Why are you not an L2? Well, we're not minting anything new on a destination chain using a bridge. Like, we're using the same assets that exist on the layer one. That makes us not an L2. So like, some VCs want to argue about that point. Some VCs are like, okay, cool. What do you want to call yourselves? And like, we're like, we don't really know yet. So like, there's a lot of workshopping that needs to be done about like what bin to put Arch Network in. We're not an L1. We're not really a blockchain. We're certainly not a layer 2. So like, figuring out what that is not just a challenge for venture, but also a challenge for retail and builders who are considering us for their infrastructure support. So I think what they found really interesting was that point that I mentioned before: trustless atomic swaps on the layer one, which is virtually impossible in all other scenarios. That's certainly what Multicoin thought was cool. Kyle Samani was like, wait a minute, like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in Bitcoin. And at that time, they had not made an investment in the Bitcoin space. Obviously they're very Solana aligned, and our architecture is very, very aligned with Solana from the standpoint of, we are a parallel execution environment. We store states independently inside of UTXOs, much like the SVM. So, and we're also a Rust-based VM and programming language. So I think that, like, we're very aligned with the Solana community. This whole monolithic versus modular debate, right? Solana is very monolithic versus the Ethereum modular landscape. Big Brain Holdings, you didn't mention, they're also another Solana, focused investor. So I think they thought it was just like a very cool and unique approach that certainly tries to address what's lacking in the Bitcoin space versus trying to shove this, square peg in a round hole, which it seems like virtually all these optimistic rollups are trying to do.
So one question though, the token, explain to me, if you're saying you're not a blockchain, how does this token, what type of token is it? Where does it live?
So like, if you're thinking about the gas token of Solana,
yeah,
The gas token on Solana isn't even an SPL token. It's just kind of this computation that's done within their VM. So it's not really like a token standard per se. It just lives within their ecosystem. So that's kind of how it'll work. That being said, we do need to figure out a token standard to launch for TGE, because at the end of the day, centralized exchanges, custodians.
Right. You want to be able to trade it, right? Where am I going to trade it?
Yeah, exactly. So we're still trying to figure out exactly what we want to do
Cool.
with the token standard. Like I said, we're very aligned with Solana, so maybe the SPL makes sense. There's certainly a lot of institutional support around that. What's sad is like there's no native Bitcoin solution. Like even if we went with BRC20, which has been listed on centralized exchanges, virtually all market makers and custodians like Anchorage or Fireblocks, which is where you're going to get institutional capital support from, like they don't support BRC20. And Runes, centralized exchanges don't even want to list Runes right now. So like that forces us to decide, well, where do we want to be? Where do we want to be aligned? Is it going to be an ERC20 because we can get total support from everyone? Is it going to be SPL? No matter what, ERC20 and SPL don't fit within our network. So either way, there's going to have to be some element of a bridge, unless we choose to go with the Runes or BRC20. But I already explained, what you're kind of giving up when you go with that standard. So it's a very complicated dynamic to kind of try to mitigate right now. There's been a couple of governance and utility tokens that have launched recently, like Liquidiums on Runes, that we're starting to get some more data about what the market actually wants to see and what they don't want to see. So we have to, be forced to think and listen to this feedback.
It's interesting. I'm excited to see what you guys come up with there. Yeah, it's really.
Pensive Shepley on the live stream says use Counterparty.
Counterparty. Run it back, baby. Run it back.
Yeah, it's interesting because it sounds like your guys' situation is very similar to Emblem's as well. That's been on mainnet for 4 years, and we've talked with a handful of tons of VCs and capital funds, and they're like, what is Emblem Vault? We're like, well, it's not a bridge, it's not a wrapped asset, but it is an interoperability protocol, but it can exist on any chain. And I was curious of the way that you approach this, because we've had this very similar kind of friction of trying to figure out what the hell it is, and then trying to figure out what the hell it is. You got to get market adoption. You got to have product market fit, and then just like with Arch and with Emblem, there's so many variety of ways to use this thing. You basically just create a classification of one at the end of the day, and it's insanely tough to pitch that. At least that's the experience that I've had so far. So props for you to being able to
whenever
nail
I
that.
figure it out, I'll let you know when I find out. But like we've been trying different things, computational network, execution layer, like all these different things, and nothing really hits home. So we'll let you know. But
token generation event, everybody speaks that language, right? So I get that.
One token.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, no, dude, props to you guys. I mean, you've been able to sit here and nail all the questions. And, for us, it's really just more trying to really understand and really trying to build relationships at the end of the day. That's why I see a lot of the people in this crowd are mostly developers and podcast hosts, because everyone's generally interested of, not necessarily what's the shiny new thing, but like, how does it improve this ecosystem? Because right now with Runes, right, Runes is, it's in a downtrend, but that's typical kind of market dynamics. But right now, everyone who's aware that's coming off, the eve of Bitcoin Nashville realizes that there is, tons of opportunity on the line if you can really nail this, especially with, the ongoing mempool sniping, which is hurting Runes and it's hurting Runes and ordinals. But most people want to use Runes. You also have kind of the East influence on BRC20 versus the West influence on Runes, right? Then you have counterparties, OG and stamps. And right now, last year in 2023, we saw the proliferation of meta protocols. There had to be at least 10 to 20 of these popping up. Now we're seeing the proliferation of, I guess you call it execution environments, L2s, operating systems. There's been at least probably 10 or 15 I've seen pop up this year. So you guys are definitely in the right area. And as long as you get hit, it's a key winning opportunity here. And I'm excited to explore more of this, especially from the Emblem side, once we move over to Bitcoin later this year. I've had so many of these different conversations of trying to figure out what's the right way for it. So, really, really props to you. I really don't have any more questions. If anybody wants to come up and ask questions, that's okay. I don't see any really on the live stream, but I'll pass it off to CMP first, and then we'll go to Adam after.
So my question, this is me kind of feeding this because I think Matt should talk about this. My question is, how can people get exposed to Arch and potentially building on Arch before mainnet? Is there some sort of hackathon that's taking place?
There's 2 hackathons going on in the Bitcoin space right now. So one, we co-sponsored one with the Bittlebox team, who does ETH Denver, permissionless, a few other expos or what have you. So we got some other co-sponsors on that one. So we got the Proto Runes team. We've got a stablecoin track sponsored by the Bima Labs team. There's the Ords Game / BitBoy team that are putting like a gaming track as well. So that's all open for submissions right now. The Bitcoin Olympics is about to open for submissions. I think on August 5th, we're also sponsoring a track for that one. So really just trying to see as many builders and as much creativity and innovation as we can see in the short term here in our testnet phase. Also to that point, we will have some comms here pretty soon that outline the incentive mechanics for that incentivized testnet. So not only will users benefit with future airdrop rewards, but also the developers will be able to get rewarded with tokens, based on certain on-chain activity and cult following that they're going to be able to develop over the next couple seasons. So the main theme here for Arch is just supporting the builders in their endeavors to try to get market share or launch the next blue chip protocol on Bitcoin. And we'll continue to invest whatever resources that we can to accelerate that, make the developer experience better. Investing in various tooling like block explorers, CLIs, IDEs, everything that really enhances that developer onboarding experience so that they're able to do what they want to do, which is just tap into that Bitcoin, make some money, kind of like recreate that flywheel that happened in Solana so many years ago, where we create this fraternal building environment where everyone is learning a new skill, sharing what they've learned. That's the kind of dynamic that we really want to foster.
And a little birdie told me that in December, there's a no-code hackathon taking place with no-code clarity. And since Arch is integrated into the platform, one can wonder, not only are technical people going to be able to take part, but also non-technical people may be able to take part in building on Arch network. So really exciting stuff, Matt. You guys are killing it.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, to that point, for the no-code hackathon, we're going to be investing in some various like cookie cutter smart contracts and SDKs and APIs so that, like Chris said, if you're not a builder, you just, maybe you're a Figma builder without being able to do these type of programmability things, but you can drag and drop a design and hack a thing together. You'll be able to utilize those types of SDKs and APIs to your benefit so that you can participate in that no-code hackathon.
Thanks for that question. Adam, you have any final questions or any takeaways from conversation?
It's just, it is going to be really interesting to see who's going to be a winner, a year or two out. It gets back to this idea of building on Bitcoin and the incredible change we've seen over the last 18 months and just like the excitement around it. Obviously, there's so many L2s being built. This isn't one, but that Arch can come in here and try to provide a different perspective for builders to come in and build the next great thing, and that next great thing can happen on Bitcoin. I think is really exciting, and we appreciate you guys for coming on and sharing what you're doing, and like it's really excited to track what you guys are able to build and what builders are able to build on top of you over the next 6 months. It's going to be really exciting to watch.
Adam wants to know when Arch Network could come to Bell's Coin.
Bell's. I had a particularly hard time trying to get onto Bell's. I don't know. That was a nightmare and a half trying to get that whole computer online and everything. So I don't know if that's in the cards, but no. I mean, like I'll say this though. Like anybody that's on this space hearing like, oh, these guys seem to be like the L2 killers or whatever. Like we certainly do not look at this as a zero-sum game. Like we want to see stacks continue to grow. We want to see other L2s continue to grow because at the end of the day, that will just continue to raise the tide for all of our ships. Like, it's not going to be Arch wins and Stacks dies. Like, that's never going to happen. You know, on
Yep.
Ethereum, you have so many other L2s, and then there's some that have more liquidity than others, and probably a lot of it's concentrated in the top 5 or 6 L2s between like Optimism, Arbitrum, Base, you know, Blast or whatever. But like, that's
Yep.
how we see this playing out on Bitcoin, where it's not like, do we need 80? Probably not, you know, but we definitely see opportunity for other L2s and other meta protocols in the space to actually get meaningful liquidity. And then we just kind of have to do a good job of building each other up, and you know, over the next 2 years.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're going to do. Well, at least for Bell's Coin, 3.0 is coming out soon, but we'll have that conversation another day. More joking, but no, Matt, really do appreciate you for coming on. Really, really interesting, intriguing conversation. Definitely will be following along, and we'll be having more conversations in the future as we've had over the past few weeks privately. Also appreciate you, Brian, from behind the Arch account, and Chris, who's also building on Arch Network and Rio on stage. Appreciate all you guys. Really, really interesting conversation. For those that are new to the show, Adam, myself, and Chris are on stage. We work at Emblem Vault, the leading cross-chain NFT protocol. We host this show Tuesday through Thursday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. Tomorrow, we're going to be hosting our town hall where we give our monthly updates of what's going on in the Emblem ecosystem. And then next week, we're going to be hosting the Waku Network, which is a private messaging service, as well as I think the Bob team is coming on next week as well. So we're going to be building and, you know, having all these conversations during this down market as we continue to raise each other up. Everyone who's in the crowd, please make sure you give Matt and the Arch Network a follow, as well as the Emblem account who's hosting this, so that you can stay up to date with everything that we're doing. Please feel free to reach out to us anytime. Again, Matt, Chris, and Brian, appreciate you guys so much. We're going to wrap this up. Appreciate everyone for coming. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. Until then, enjoy and keep building, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Matt.